Welcome, teacher friend. I'm Lori.
And I'm Melissa.
We are two literacy educators in Baltimore. We want the best for all kids, and we know you do too.
Our district recently adopted a new literacy curriculum, which meant a lot of change for everyone. Lori and I can't wait to keep learning about literacy with you today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Literacy Podcast. Melissa and Lori love literacy. We can't wait to talk to today's guest because she is a rock star, and we mentioned her briefly in one of our podcasts. And after mentioning very briefly, and after very briefly mentioning her, we were flooded with emails. What is her story?
Who is this person?
How did she do this? Who is she? Tell us more about her. So we get to tell you more about someone who we mentioned very briefly in one of our podcasts, Miss Angie Hanlin. So thank you, Angie, for joining us on the podcast.
I'm so excited.
Oh my gosh, thank you both so much, Melissa and Lori. I'm so excited to be with you and to get to talk to you. I've listened to the podcast, so now I can't believe I'm actually getting to talk to you and be on a podcast. So yeah, it's kind of the highlight of my week so far. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. We read about your story, and we were just inspired. So we're very excited to talk with you today, and just thrilled that you said yes to podcasting with us. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah.
So can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself, your background,
Sure.
where you are now?
Yes, I would love to. I'm in my 23rd year of education. And in those years, I've been an elementary classroom teacher in grades 3, 4, and 5, an instructional coach, a literacy consultant. I've done several years as a curriculum and professional development coordinator. And then I spent 6 years as an elementary principal. And all of that work was done in the at Matthews Elementary in the New Madrid County R1 School District. That's in Southeast Missouri. And I am currently in my first year. It's still odd to say this, as a superintendent in Thorpe, Wisconsin. So I moved to Thorpe, Wisconsin on July 30th, and I started my day one here as superintendent on July 1st.
So exciting.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So you're learning all over again a little, right?
I am. So I kind of wrapped up this, I really feel like, wonderful journey. I feel like we had this inspirational journey, and we did this great work in my time in New Madrid County R1, and especially the 6 years as principal of Matthews Elementary were really the absolute highlight of my entire career, every day of that work. And now I've honestly started over on a brand new journey, and this one is equally exciting, for very different reasons, and the chance to be a superintendent and to make, to have an impact on an entire district and a community, and it's just been very, very exciting. It's still a new journey, but it's very, very exciting.
That's what I was going to say. You're right at the beginning of the journey, though.
I am, yeah. But it's so exciting for the possibilities. We had a data meeting yesterday, our weekly, we call it dot card meeting. So we look at our weekly progress monitoring data and, to hear about the student growth. And so it's all exciting. I know it's like a brand new journey. They've kind of been on the journey, and now I've joined them, and we're doing this journey together. But yeah, it's just very, very exciting. It's kind of exciting, though, to go back and do it again. I wondered what that would feel like, as I knew that I was leaving Missouri, what's this going to feel like? But it's been exciting.
You really get to think about affecting change in a whole district, right? Versus a school. So that's
already huge.
That's huge.
So, I never wanted to leave the classroom. And so then I was pulled out of the classroom to be an instructional coach. And each time, each level that I've gone to, I've just always thought about who are the students that I'm working with at the time, and then how many students do I have the possibility with this team to reach. And so, you have between 25 and 30 in a classroom, and then you go to a building principal, and then you have a building And then the exciting thing about superintendent is it's the whole district,
Mm-hmm.
and it's all the students and all the teachers and all the parents, and then also the community. How can you engage that community, and can I possibly have a difference on an entire community? So I'm humbled by the chance that I even get that opportunity. So just, hoping and dreaming of great things here.
Absolutely.
Well, we can't wait to read about this journey and the story that you're about to, you're in the midst of impacting change with this new venture in your life, but we're hoping that you might be able to share your incredible story of change that, from Missouri, before we get any further, because there is a reason why you are superintendent right now. And I believe that part of it is not just who you are, but what you did. So would you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Sure. So I started as I was a classroom teacher in New Madrid County, was pulled out to become the instructional coach. And the reason why I talk about that is there's one key aspect that was very, very important. We started giving professional development on research-based instructional practices, and we had what I call pockets of success. There were 5 buildings, and we had some great things going on. But the struggle we were having is to find just an entire building where it was with 100% fidelity in the entire building. So the building where I had taught at for, I think like 13 years, came available for me to be the principal, and I accepted that. And I thought, the chance to go be building principal. And I had some consultants that really have been my mentors for many, many years. And those ladies were Dr. Vicki Gibson, Dr. Jan Hasbrook, and then Patty Montgomery. And I was talking to them at Plain Talk. And I'm like, there's this opportunity. And they're like, yeah, you absolutely need to do that. And then set this up at the building level and make this happen. So I became the principal 7 years ago now at Matthews Elementary in the district, and started our work there. And I had been out of the building 3.5 years being an instructional coach, and I was a little surprised. It wasn't quite the same when I went back. So when I started, there was low morale. There was very high rate of absenteeism. There was an extremely high rate of discipline referrals and incredibly low scores. And I think all of that combined then had led to very low morale. So we got our state test. In Missouri, it's called the MAP test. And so our spring scores came out, and we got those very late in the summer. And I immediately kind of put us on a self-imposed school improvement plan of like, oh my gosh, we've got to do something. But then a couple of months in, we were identified as the state of being like a school turnaround school. And at the time in Missouri, it was called a focus school. And so that is really the catalyst that kind of sparked the whole change. And so we got our information, and I'm actually, I always kind of say I was actually a bit excited. That sounds so odd. I was a bit excited when I got the call from the state that, you're a focus school. A lot of people said, weren't you discouraged? I'm like, no, I was actually encouraged, because it's like someone has noticed that we've got improvements to make. And now this is I've looked at this as an opportunity to really create a sense of urgency and to go forward. So at that time, when we were identified, we were coming off of a building average for grades 3, 4, and 5 on the state assessment, ELA of a 13%. Okay, so, and then our math percentage was a 5%. So 13% of 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders were proficient in ELA, and 5% were in mathematics. As far as the benchmark scores, the spring before, they had less than 20% of the school population was at the 50th percentile or higher on AIMSweb, and less than 10% were at the 50th percentile or higher in mathematics.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So we had a meeting in the library to kind of tell everyone, bring the staff in, and like, okay, this is where we are. And even hearing those scores that I just said, there was so much shock. It was very, like, kind of almost like grief stricken of like, what? But then there was this shock. And the first things the teachers were kind of like, there's no way, like, that's got to be a mistake. Everyone's looking around.
Oh my.
So I'd had our scores covered up, so I kind of took off the sheet and I'm like, let's look back at, where we are. And it was such a discouraging moment, but it was also a powerful moment. And I remember saying, we have got to own these scores. This is where we are. We have to know where we are, and we've got to own this data. And I began to smile, and I'm like, because here is why. This is why we have to own these numbers. We've got to own this 13. We've got to own this 5. We've got to own this less than 20 and this less than 10. Because we are not staying here. This is where we are right now, but this is not where we're going. And so I told them, if we want to own the 90, the 95, and 100, because that's where I believe we can get to, then we've got to own these scores behind us.
Yeah.
And so go ahead.
Sorry. What stands out to me and what I feel like I've seen with like other, it may be in another school done it in the past. I'm sharing something from my career, but I'm not going to name the school.
Okay.
That the leader asked why. Like, why do we think this is the case? And I think what you did was so much more powerful because it doesn't really matter why it is the way it is. It's just, it is what it is. I think I shared in the pre-call, I was like, Angie, what you did was, I think, called radical acceptance. And I love it. Like, you were like, we're radically accepting that this is where we are. And the question is not why based, it's how. How can we get to 100%? How can we service our students better? And you didn't even like pose that. You were just like, we're moving. And then, we're going to work together to figure out how. But like, here's some first steps and here's how we're going to approach this. But I love your thought of let's just radically accept where we are, because that probably was the hardest moment for everyone. Like, I imagine that just being incredibly difficult.
Absolutely. I remember getting so choked up because I had taught with those teachers. I mean, this was the staff that I had been with, and they were phenomenal teachers. I mean, and it was a great school, and I could see on their faces, I mean, as they were turning around looking at each other, and I said, take a minute and like turn and talk. And so as they were like, we've worked so hard. And that's the thing that I'm like, let's just admit that this is a great school. This is a great staff. But we've got to do things differently, so we're going to start this and we're going to accept this, and we just need to accept this and where we are. And it took me back to John Hattie's, like, people tease me that you can't have a conversation with me without me saying John Hattie. And
it's true. We've talked to you twice now, and you've mentioned I'm just kidding.
And I have 2 copies, and I have one that always stays on my bookshelf and one stays on my desk. So I just picked up the one off my desk. But in his assessment capable learners, you have to know, where am I? Where am I going? And how close am I to that goal? So it's like, you've got to accept where we are. Just own it, and own it because you aren't staying there. Like, I get it. If you could be upset if, well, this is where we are and this is where we're going to stay, but no, we aren't staying there. That's just where we are right now. And so where are we going? And I'm like, okay, so I went back to Jan Hasbrook. What is possible?
Yeah.
So I asked them, what do you think's possible? And so I heard like 40%, 50%, 60%. I think, if I remember correctly, I think the highest we got in that meeting that day was 65%. They felt that 65% of students could read at grade level. And I'm like, okay, so Jan Hasbrook says, and now I've also heard Patty Montgomery say it multiple times, but 95% of students can read at grade level. And there's just like silence. And I'm like, and that is where we're going.
Yeah, that seems like such a leap from where they were. I can imagine it being like.
Well, and it sounds almost like unbelievable, undoable. Right. But I'm like, that's not going to be the immediate goal. That's going to be a long-term goal. So what we did was we set first-year goals, 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, and I'm going to come back to that 5-year goal at the end, because they've just had some great news that the school has received with their new principal. And I guess I could go ahead and say it now, but I mean, we started as like a focus school. Right. We started as a school turnaround. And so that day I'm like, where do we want to be? What's the ultimate? And that school had at one time been a blue ribbon school and a gold star school. A gold star school in Missouri. That means one of the top performing schools. And they're like, we want those banners back. Mm-hmm. And going to try not to get choked up. But that school just found out they've just achieved, based upon their spring scores last year, that team, we said that day in the library, and it's come true. They've just been identified as a Gold Star school.
Oh,
so,
yay! And
yes.
how long? Like, when did you sit in the library and have this conversation? When was that?
That was 6 years ago. And so that's kind of like your year one, your identification year. So your first year starts the next year, like when they really start looking at those scores. And we set the goal of we want to do this in 3 to 5 years. We had huge growth over 3 years. But then on that 5th year they're going to be a Gold Star school.
That's
so
amazing.
And
it is. It's amazing.
I just want to like impart some of the data that you shared in our pre-call, and please take over after I, start you off.
Okay.
But
sure,
0% in grade 4 on state tests. There was not one child proficient, not even close on both reading and math.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and so they went ahead, and so their scores last spring, it was my last year with them as principal. And I want to throw out, this has been all through the COVID era and all this pandemic.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah.
Yeah, because we none knew what we were getting into, and it's been a serious challenge.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably the masterpiece of an understatement by saying it's been a serious challenge. It's probably been the greatest challenge we faced as educators. But in 2019, there was a group of third graders that reached the 95% proficient on the state test. And so then in 4th grade, 2020, they didn't take the test because of shutdown. So we roll into the 2021 school year, and we were on a blended school year last year. So that meant that there was like a group A and group B. There was a group that came Monday, Wednesday. There was a group that came Monday, Thursday, and a group that came Tuesday, Friday. And we did all of our work with our virtual students on Wednesday. We stayed blended from August through till February.
Oh, wow.
But we continued with high quality instruction, research-based instruction, focused weekly on data. And so that group that was 95% proficient, yes, we had done it. They went to 5th grade and didn't test in 4th and 5th grade, and they hit 100%.
Oh my gosh, stop.
100% of them. And not just that, 100% of them were proficient or advanced. 80% of those students were advanced.
Wow.
That's amazing.
The 3rd grade, and they had been, didn't finish their 2nd grade year, going to 3rd grade, spend 3/4 blended. They came out with 76% proficient, with 76% advanced. It was, and 77% proficient, with over half of those students being advanced in 4th. And math was the same way. The scores were high. And so then that put them at an ELA building average of 84%. And we had at one time, and that's coming off of 13. So we started with a building average of 13, and then we concluded with 80. Percent that then went to 84%.
So that was
the
even
next question. COVID. Yeah.
Right. The question that everyone wants to know is, how did you do that? How did you get there?
Yeah,
Because
amidst all of these reasons for failure, right?
Yeah.
This was a school that posed lots of challenges.
Absolutely, yeah. We had always been upper 80s into 90% free reduced lunch, with the majority of that percent being free lunch. A lot of split homes, broken homes, a lot of students that were either an open DFS case or in foster care. I say often that we really had every excuse that you could make for a reason why students couldn't perform. They would come to kindergarten either not being in preschool or not being really ready for school. Like I said, a lot of discipline concerns, lots of absenteeism, high rate of absenteeism. But we just didn't use anything as an excuse. And one of the things that we had to do right off the bat was change our mindset. And it was all means all. That really was the first thing there are mindset questions in the book, Visible Learning for Teachers. And we did that activity the summer before we started with my first year, brought the teachers in, and really looked at what is the mindset of the school? Where are we? What do we believe about ourselves? What do we believe about our school? And it was really changing that mindset that all can learn. They might not all learn in the same way. They might not all reach proficiency or mastery on the same day, but all can learn. That was the first thing. The other, one of our next steps was we've got to base all of this on data. So to do that, and sometimes this sounds odd, I think, when I say it, but right off the bat, we took the focus off of teaching and put it on learning. I'll give you a second because that
yeah,
often sounds
say that
like,
again.
Yeah.
Isn't it the same thing? No, I know it's not.
It's actually not. So we took the focus off of teaching and placed it on learning. And by that, my reasoning for that was this. Even if you've just been a substitute teacher or like you're doing your student teaching, you can have a beautiful lesson plan. And just because you taught it, and maybe even just because you taught it well, does not mean that the students learned it. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, let's not say, but I covered it but I taught that. I know. Yeah, you probably did teach it and you did cover it. Did they learn it? That's what we're going to look at. And the only way we're going to know is by a relentless, vigorous look at that data. But Patty Montgomery calls that a laser-like focus. Patty Montgomery of Schools Cubed calls it a laser-like focus on data. And so the school and the district, we had been really good at collecting it and kind of going through it and sharing it, but not deeply analyzing it. And then going to the level of every single student and then leaving a data meeting with a plan in my hands. What am I going to do when I go back into that classroom in whole group, small group? What are we going to do? So we decided that data would be the guide. It's not if we felt successful or if we felt like they had learned it, looking at the data.
Angie, can you give some examples of the kinds of data you were looking at for literacy specifically? I know you did this for more than just literacy, but
Sure, we did it. We did it for literacy and math, but we were with Ames Web, and then we went to Ames Web. First it was Ames Web 1.0, and then it was Ames Web Plus. And so it's looking at those benchmark scores and not just looking at the 3 benchmarks. That's what we had done in the past, beginning, middle, and end of year. Mm-hmm. We added to that, and this is where we're at in Thorpe also. We added in 6-week check-ins. Because, beginning of year, you don't want to wait till December or January to see if there's a problem. So go 6 weeks in. That's 2 data cycles. So 3 weeks of progress monitoring and another 3-week, a 6-week check-in. And who's making progress, who is not, and what are we going to do about it? Why is that, and what are we going to do about it? And then when we really had the change at Matthews Elementary is when we started looking at that weekly. And we did dot cards and looking at the weekly progress monitoring. And again, those questions, who's making progress? Why? Who is not making progress and why? Why do we think that is? And then what are we going to do in response to the data? And that was a meeting that I mentioned that we had yesterday here in Thorpe is one of those dot card meetings of, looking at the progress monitoring scores. And here our assessment tool is FastBridge. But looking at those reading and math benchmark scores. And then we also use those state scores to set end-of-year goals on that as well. Mm-hmm. But the data that we were talking about in our data meetings, that was the benchmark assessments. And in Missouri, it was Ames Web Plus, and then here it's FastBridge.
And is that focused mostly on, like, foundational skills, phonics, fluency?
Yeah, and like letter naming, fluency, letter sound fluency, nonsense words, to see if a child can blend or not. There's a fluency score, a CBM in fluency. There's also, you get things on comprehension, vocabulary, other things as well. But yeah, those foundational literacy scores.
Okay. And what I'm thinking is this is really important that you're speaking about it right now as if you could go teach the same thing that the teachers are teaching. It feels like
she did
to me,
at one point.
I know. I mean, that's what I'm saying. It feels like you really know your stuff. And that's what's striking me as important because one of the pivotal pieces that you mentioned once, but I'll say it again, is that leaders supported teachers with next steps when they went back to their classrooms. It was like they left with a plan. And I'd like to ask a clarifying question about that. Are they supporting with, like, does the tier 1 instruction stay the same? And then what the the next steps for teachers look like interventions for specific students. So this is what I'm imagining. And then you tell me if this is right or wrong or how it played out in your school.
Okay.
I'm imagining I'm a teacher. I'm sitting at the data meeting. I bring my data to this weekly data meeting. We come up with a concrete plan and I go back to my classroom. I continue to use whatever program I'm using to teach foundational skills to my whole group of students. And then I pull my different groups of students who, based on that data meeting, need specific intervention support. So maybe they need to be retaught, digraphs or I notice that they're struggling with CVC words or their letter naming, needs some refreshing or help. So I can pull them over to my table. I work with them explicitly on these skills. And then I can come back to the data meeting and say, here's my data based on what I did this week with my students. Here's my intervention group data. Here's my whole group data. And what now? Like what next? Is that how that would work? So like tier 1 keeps moving.
Absolutely. And then too, so I'm going to use a very specific example that came up yesterday. So in tier 1 instruction, you can target those low students, like the students that are red, those tier 3 students. You can target them even in whole group before you even get them to the small group table. So there were 3 students in a classroom that the teacher's like, here are my 3 red dots. And I said, okay, so those 3 students, pull those cards. This was yesterday afternoon. Pull those 3 cards. Okay. So every single thing that you read, because their fluency, it's just not gone up and up. It's going up a tiny bit. So I said, all right, every single thing you read in whole group, let's say that you've done a whole group read on something, or like you've read this list of sight words or whatever it is that you've just read. Okay. Blending lines, sentences, whatever it is. Then you target those students and then you call their name. I'm going to make up names like Sally, Bob, Tim. Okay, what did we just read? Read that again for us. And the students in the classroom don't know what you're doing, but as the teacher, you are specifically targeting those students and you're doing all of that. And I said yesterday in the meeting, why are we doing that? And they're like, to increase the number of repetitions, because it's all about increasing the number of repetitions. So even in tier 1 instruction, we can begin targeting and drilling down and targeting those specific students that are struggling. So then when they get to small group, so like yesterday, it's like we always ask the question at each weekly meeting, based upon this data that you're looking at right now, do you need to change your groups? It's like, well, yeah, I do. Okay, so what would that look like? And so like this was at the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade table when they were meeting together and talking. And so they were going to do a change in their groups. And so then I'm like, okay, but when they come to the table, you're still going to give an individual goal. So when they're reading in small group, remind them you're working on improving accuracy. Just real quick, right around that table, you're still working on improving fluency. You're at 117, and the next goal that we want you at, we want you to try to get to 124 this next week. And so then go around and remind those students of what their individual goal is. And in those meetings, especially from the beginning, middle, and end of year benchmark meetings and the 6-week check-ins, it's if a teacher is unclear, this is where the leadership comes in. If they're like, okay, because this is what teachers, that you can't just tell them, go forth and do. You have to show it's model, model, model. So the leader has to be willing to go in and model in whole group, model in small group. And I think that's where the power comes in, because then once a teacher sees it, it's like, oh my gosh, yes, I completely get that now. But if a teacher's unsure, you have to show them, what does that look like in the classroom? What does that sound like? What is different about that? Then there are also teachers that want to try it in their room, but they want you to be sitting there watching and giving them feedback. In particular, like we have a 2nd grade teacher that doesn't always want modeling, but she wants feedback here. And so I've gone in her room so many times this year. And the building leader as well. Building leaders are in the classrooms here on a regular basis. I'm a superintendent still in rooms, but I mean, our building leaders are as well. And so then give them feedback on, is that it, and what can I do? What can I say to tweak that and make that better?
So exciting. I think it speaks to me very clearly that nothing is more important than instruction.
Nothing is more important. And we've been doing, we're on our second book study as an administration team. And our first one was we went through the Wallace Foundation, that research that what is it that effective principals do? And it came out of that you have to be an instructional leader. And you can gain an extra 3 months of learning for your students with a highly effective building leader that can be the instructional leader. And that's in those classrooms, giving feedback. We have a very explicit walkthrough tool that we use to then provide feedback to teachers. And then that also tells us, like, if a group of teachers are struggling, what do we need to give the next set of professional development on? The early release, what do we need to be talking about those teachers? And do we need a teacher to go watch another teacher, based upon that? And the book study we're on right now is Coherence by Michael Fullen and Joanne Quinn. And again, it's still talking about that book's about the right drivers in education. And the thing that holds it all together in the coherence is its leadership. It comes down to the building leader. So if there's a building or a district leader listening, I just feel like I always have to say it rises and falls on us. And we have to own that. And we have to be present in everything. Like a data meeting can't take place without us being there. And I know we have important things. I know there are fires to put out. I mean, again, we've gone through a pandemic. There's always something. And I get that there can always be something, but there's always something, but the reason that we come to school each day is student academic success. And are they moving and are they not? And if not, what are we going to do in response to that? And we have to be, first and foremost, an instructional leader. And it rises and falls on us. And those teachers get there. They make that impact on their students by our leadership, or they don't do it by our leadership.
Yeah. Angie, I wanted to back up to, because you taught me something as a leader the last time we met about the repetitions. You mentioned it when you were talking
Melissa,
about
we're thinking the same thing.
I know we were.
I have it highlighted in yellow in our notes.
And I just think like that's something that you brought to us in our meeting. And I was like, oh, wow, like that sparked something for me. If I was in the classroom, that would have changed the way I was teaching because of something you taught me. So can you just tell about the importance of the repetitions, and I forget the exact numbers. You can tell us.
We've talked already about that everyone can learn. All students can learn. But we do know from research that different learners they need different number of repetitions to learn. So it's on my dry erase board. I'm looking at it right now in my office, because when we have our meeting in here, with teachers and admin, I'm like, look, it's right back there. So a gifted learner needs 1 to 4 repetitions. A typical learner needs 4 to 14 repetitions. A struggling learner, so here we go, it's 14 to 40. And then a disabled learner, or someone that's really struggling, or a learning disability, a child with dyslexia, something like that, 40 to 200 repetitions. So first of all, just kind of getting that, we often say, like, if something worked, like, how did that work? Like yesterday, in the meeting yesterday, oh my gosh, the student had great growth. What it is, and like, I increased the number of repetitions. Right. I counted the number of repetitions they were going to have with that in whole group and how many they were going to have in small group. And I learned that as a building leader from Patty Montgomery when Schools Cubed came in and started working with me and giving. She really works with leaders and helping them know what to do and how to be an instructional leader and about school growth and everything. And so that stayed on the wall in our data room. And so it's something that here in Thorpe we refer to a lot too. And it goes as specific as actually sometimes tally marking and thinking, looking in that manual, how many repetitions will they get in whole group? And then when I have them at small group, how many repetitions can I get there? Whole group wrap up, how many can I get? And then if a child's being pulled out for intervention, how many repetitions can we get there? If it's a student with an IEP, then we're coordinating with a special education teacher. How many repetitions can you get in your room? And it's constantly focusing on the number of repetitions we're bringing to those students in a day a lesson, class period, and a week. And that comes from Marianne Wolf and her research. She's written a lot of great books in literacy. Dr. Marianne Wolf. So that's from her research.
That's great. And I said it would have changed the way I would look at the way I taught, especially like these skills, right? These foundational skills that you want to make sure they get them before they move on. I would normally think like, but I taught it 5 times. I taught it 7 times. I taught it 20 times, and you would think like, I don't know what else to do. And just thinking that like, oh, well, they just haven't gotten the number of repetitions they need.
Right.
Like totally changed the way I would teach.
Yeah. And often it just comes down to that they haven't had enough repetitions. And, it's sometimes sitting and planning with teachers. And I remember the first grade teachers at Matthews Elementary, and we had out our manuals. I'm like, okay, so let's count how many, Miss Nelson, going to give a shout out to Miss Nelson. She's fabulous. And I was like, okay, so how many repetitions are in the whole group lesson, and counting. Okay, so how many groups are in a small group lesson? And like, are we at 40? Like, no. Okay, so what are we going to do? Where are we going to plug in and get those repetitions at? And it's that specific of planning. So I always say that the how of so much of this, or the what of so much of this work, is the science of reading. Foundational literacy skills that the teachers have to know. They can't do this work if they don't have, and if we don't deepen their knowledge base and deepen their foundational learning. And they've got to know the science of reading. That's really what they need to know. And that's how we build their foundation. But they also have to know how to provide that. You can't stop with just the science of reading. You've got to know how. And for our how, my how that I've always used either as instructional coach, principal, or superintendent is the work of Dr. Anita Archer, Explicit Instruction. That and the research-based instructional practices of John Hattie. That's the how. That's how you're going to deliver that. And then what's that going to look like and sound like in the classroom.
Can you tell a little bit more about that, Angie? Like, what does that, for people that don't know the researchers?
Sure. So, Dr. Anita Archer, can I back up just for 1 second? I always feel like I'm never sitting around quoting like Angie Hanlin. Like, this is never like an Angela Hanlin thing. So I'm always like pretty quick to point out like, hey, I didn't wake up knowing this. And when I was in the classroom, I did not know this. I am truly the product of high quality professional development. That journey began with Dr. Vicki Gibson, who taught me about, she's who I first heard about Anita Archer from, Explicit Instruction, the Science of Reading, and then Jan Hasbrook from Gibson Hasbrook. That's really where my mentoring began. But Dr. Anita Archer has the I do, we do, you do. We often now, if you've ever heard her present, it's often now too, you've got I do, we do, and lots of I do, model, we do. And a lot of times now it's kind of like, you guys do it. I like y'all, Southeast America, y'all do it together, and then you do it independently. But a lot of people think the explicit instruction is just the delivery of the lesson. And it's actually twofold. It's the design of the lesson. And that's where the design part of the explicit instruction is, how many repetitions am I going to get? How many examples am I going to do of that? Am I going to do 4 or am I going to do 12? Because it's very different. And you've got to, the more time that as teachers we spend on the design of that lesson, the easier the delivery is. So I'll say that again. I just think it's critically important. The more time as teachers we spend on designing that lesson, the better the delivery rolls out, the better we can deliver it. So there's explicit planning, and there's also then explicit delivery. And as far as like research-based instructional practices, John Hattie has his list. Always, if you ever want to know how much I used it, like look at all the tab. Like this is tabbed and written in.
We see it. It's amazing.
Yeah. So there's the list of all the instructional practices ranked by effect size. And so we knew at Matthews Elementary, we were going to have at least 2 years growth to get these students 2 years or more. So I literally took the book and found the 0.65. And like, there we go. Because 0.4, that's 1 year typical growth by a typical student and typical classroom, average year's growth. We have to go beyond that. So it was all of those instructional practices above that. And the big focus was assessment capable learners, setting goals, giving high quality feedback. Space versus mass, that's a big one. This is back where you put it, take the focus off of teaching, place it on learning. But you can't just do a mass unit on that and expect kids will master that content. If it's that critically important, those standards, it's spiraling through and spacing that out, and making sure I'm hitting those priority standards consistently all the time in my lessons. So, do you want me to go deeper? Like, I could talk about that all day. So if you want a little more.
I'm just like sitting here learning.
I know. I love listening to you. I really love how you use your resources so wisely. And it sounds like you lean on them frequently, which instead of, learning from lots of different, I'm sure that you continue to read, right? And
absolutely.
learn.
Yeah.
But I love how you have like your core resources. You're like, these are my foundational beliefs. These are my foundations.
And they're like right there.
On.
I love that you're like, it's right there on my dry erase board. It's right here on my desk.
They're my inspiration, and they're, if I ever am discouraged, it's like, wait a minute. And this is what I think is, anytime I've been asked to share any of my story or journey or whatever, I always have said, I've tried to say yes, if at all possible, because it's not anything like, I don't have any secret powers myself. Like, no, there were no magic wands, at Matthews Elementary, there are no magic wands in Thorpe. And we don't have to reinvent this. That's the great thing. I think that's the message we need to get to all teachers. The research is there. Mm-hmm. And when I found out, when Vicki Gibson, I heard her present and said, this is 40 plus years of empirical research. I'm like, oh my gosh, why are we just not doing that?
Well, and why didn't we learn about it in college? That's a whole other question, but
isn't it? That's a whole other discussion. I love Donna. Donna's.
She's going to podcast with us. She agreed to.
Oh, that's I love her Facebook group. What I should have learned in college, and it's so true. But one of the things that too we said early on in our journey at Matthews is no blaming, no shaming. Mm-hmm. And the Reading League says that as well. It's a no blame, no shame zone. Laura Stewart always says that. Yeah. And that's what we did. It doesn't matter how we got here. We mentioned that earlier. Yeah. And it doesn't matter what you did not know. There's no blame there. But now that we do know, and now that we know what works, let's give up and get rid of what doesn't work. Let's get rid of those things. What works and what are we going to do? That's why in those weekly data meetings, the why question is so important. Not just who made progress. Why? What was it? Because this is what, I'm sorry, I get so excited. This is what I want the teachers to realize. What was it that I did in my classroom this week that helped that child achieve that? Or as the interventionist, as they're sitting there looking at their student data, what was it that I did in my intervention group this week that led to the student making that growth? Because if we can, and then as they say that, like yesterday in the commons area, as they said that, then we have them share that out with everybody. They've been working, and like K1's been working together, second and third, and then fourth, fifth, and sixth, but then share that out because we want everyone to then hear those things that work so everyone can do that. Mm-hmm. So, what is it that works? And then we don't have to make this stuff up or reinvent it all the time.
Can I ask? So I love hearing this. And I know like one of the things that you mentioned earlier that I'm stuck on, obviously, are those number of repetitions, because it's so clear. So I'm imagining if I'm a teacher, I'm thinking, okay, one of the things I might have noticed would be repetitions, but can you share some of the things that you heard yesterday?
Yes. Okay. So a big one that we're focusing on right now is repeated readings, because fluency improves from repeated readings. So school-wide, actually, we have it K-8. We're doing dyad reading. And that is where you've got a partner readers. And so the higher reader reads like the paragraph. It depends upon the age level, but maybe the few sentences or read the sentence. And then the lower reader does the echo reading. So they're hearing that better model of that reading of a fluent reader, and then they echo read that. So dyad reading, we're doing that anywhere from 7 to 10 minutes, depending upon the group. That is done daily, religiously. Like I gave the example. Okay, so if we find out if we're dismissing early for school, like for snow or whatever, you get in the dyad reading.
That's
and
amazing.
Then like space versus math, you get in your math minute and your number talk. Those are your non-negotiables we've got to get through. But we have found that repeated reading, like sending home one passage, like a fluency passage or like a decodable or whatever it is, depending upon where that student is at and what work they need. If it's an accuracy, if it's an accuracy issue, they're going to be in decodable text. So it's not just new text every single day. It's that repeated reading of that passage, that story, getting in that basal and doing the repeated reading. So lots of like maybe the teacher reads it, the students echo read it, and then like girls read, boys read, really digging in repeated readings. Mm-hmm. And so some of the teachers that had just a fluency group and some students were a bit stagnant or maybe weren't getting enough growth on their kind of trend line to reach that end of your target. They increased repeated readings. And so it was so exciting yesterday to see the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade teachers, because I love to walk around. The administrators were walking around as the teachers are saying this. And so I'm like, so what? They're like, what was it? And they're like, repeated readings. So I sent home and had that student sound the same passage and just read it like 3 times each night. And that it's just like 3 minutes of work each night, but just focus on this same passage, and then her fluency score went up. And that was the only change. So I know, that's what did
and
it.
It's such a quick
simple.
win. Like I feel like in education, sometimes it's hard to see quick results, but there are some quick wins, and that's one of them, that's so important to celebrate that and to share. That's a huge
reading
one.
in general, right? Like it really does make a big difference.
And I know too, like teachers will say, because time is you're always focused on time. What do I have time for? And I've got to try to fit so many things in my time. This actually kind of simplifies it. Like you take a really meaty page of your text, and that small group do, repeated readings of different passage or paragraphs or sections of that text. And then you come back to that because it's the repeated reading that's going to boost that fluency score. So you don't have to sit there in small group and try to reread every page of that story. Back there. Right. And I remember trying to, in my first planning, my small group when I was first doing this work, how much of the story can I get through on Monday? How much can I get through on Tuesday? But, once they've been introduced and kind of heard the whole story or read through it all, then really just pick a section of that story that you really want to drill down on. A teacher, our 7th grade teacher, came to me yesterday and said, should I really start looking at what the sections I'm having them do in dyad reading? And I'm like, yes. Like really pick a pivotal part of the story of like maybe where the problem or solution is at, or like really it's deeply going into the character, and really just have them like do repeated readings of maybe that page of text through the dyad reading. So it's something that's so simple, but you always get such a big gain from it.
Yeah. We are big fluency fans.
Oh, yeah.
But I know that you have lots of great ways to celebrate all of your quick wins and results. Would you share a little bit about who you get involved and how you do that? I mean, you don't have to go into great detail, but I just love how you involved everyone when you shared with us.
Oh, okay. So we do celebrations. Like we have weekly newsletters that go out that the building administrators send out. And so there's like celebrations on there. And so we put like our first instructional focus of the school year was just a standards-based learning objective, clear learning objective on the board, and that it was posted and referred back to in the lesson. And so then like if you go around and you've seen that, then we'll either send out an email or put it on the newsletter like, oh my gosh, like 87% of teachers, or like, and we started maybe like less than half, and then it's 67%. And then we're up to, I remember when we hit 72% and 76. And, now we're up to, it's 88% of the teachers doing it consistently 88% of the time. We'll have things too that, if you go in a room and something really great happens, just sending out an all staff email of like, hey, this is great. We start every data team meeting off with celebrations. I said yesterday in the meeting, tell me something good. We all need to hear something good. Like, what is something that happened this week that's good? We also have, currently here in Thorpe, we have super referrals. If a student does something that's really, really great, if they've met a goal or, this big accomplishment, then they fill out a super referral, and then they come to the superintendent, for their super referral. We do super shout outs for different things. The students when I was principal in Matthews Elementary, anytime a child met a goal, they got to come to the office and ring a bell. And then, sometimes I'd get on a loudspeaker and kind of, oh my gosh, like everyone listen to this.
It
great
reminds me of
achievement.
what they do at my husband's office. They ring a gong when they get certain, they get something like an important contract or something. I'm not saying it right, but like a very good deal. And
Yes.
they ring a gong. And I remember thinking, oh, that's something that I feel like should be done in an elementary school, but I love that they're doing that at your corporate work and everybody like cheers and celebrates. And I'm like, this is so cool. And what a great way. I mean, your bell ringing is reminding me of that.
So when I was building principal, to come ring the bell, and I just loved it. I never got tired of it. And I'd have like yellow, our colors were green and yellow for New Mexico County. And so I had my little green and yellow pom-poms and would wave, and secretary, and the teachers, and we would all clap and celebrate. And then the kids would get to ring the bell. Here, right now, the theme is our students are believable. And so if they meet a goal, then they get a certificate that week and a gumball. And so then there's a great big huge massive board. It kind of takes out like a whole section of the wall in our hallway, and it's just covered with gumballs with the students' names on there. Aww. There's a gumball machine. It's as cute as it can be, but it's constantly celebrating student success. And success, we've all heard it, but success begets success. And when you start focusing on that, and when you turn those students in charge of, this is my goal, this is where I am, again, assessment capable learners, this is where I am, this is my goal, and how am I going to know if I reach that goal? And they can talk about that. They can share that language. And then when they start celebrating that, it's, we were talking about it yesterday in our data meeting. I'm like, it's like get out of their way, because you just really can't stop it at that point. And they know so much about their goal. I think we talked about this when we did our pre-call, but I've got this hanging up in my office.
I was just going to ask you about this.
I know.
Yeah. The little girl that wrote, they were doing a lesson on Martin Luther King Jr., and it was, I have a dream. And so they asked, the students were writing what their dream was. And a little girl wrote, I have a dream that I can read 116 words per minute. That was her next goal. So I can be a better fluent reader.
I love that so much.
I just love that. And, that's when you give those students the goals, they want to reach them, and the teachers have the goals. And then, we always look at our benchmark and 6-week check-in. Are we on pace to hit that middle of your goal? Did we hit it? And if not, okay, so we didn't. It's not going to be, blame, shame, defeat, discouragement. Okay, then what are we going to do? And I always say we've done a lot of growth mindset work. I did it as a classroom teacher, principal, and we've done a lot of it here as well. I just don't think you can do this without instilling a growth mindset in everyone that's involved in the work, the students, the teachers, the leaders, and saying, okay, we aren't there, or I can't do it. We just aren't there yet. So what's the next goal, and what are we going to do? If we didn't hit it this week, what are we going to do next week?
Yeah. I love that word yet. You're reminding me to use it more often.
Yeah. Because, and that's, in education, this work is so hard. It is relentless. It's daunting. It never stops. Even if I remember when I found out I was not that we were exiting the focus school status at Matthews Elementary, and I was at the meeting with all the principals that had been focus school principals, and they said, "Oh my gosh, aren't you excited? Because now you guys can kind of, back off a little bit." I'm like, oh my gosh, no, we can't. Because, you can't until it's 100%. Like you can't. And then then it's, even once you hit it, you have to sustain it. And sustaining it can be just as hard as getting there. So I think the yet and the growth mindset, we always have to focus on that, because if there's a setback, stop. Don't focus on that. You just haven't reached that goal yet. You can and you will. And we as a team, and that's where leaders also come into play. Because if those teachers are discouraged, it is our work, our job, I feel our calling, to go in there and empower those teachers to not only believe they can do it, but help them achieve that. And to make sure and ensure that they get that done, whatever it looks like. And it looks like different things. For teachers, I mentioned to some teacher, it's actually modeling in their room. Mm-hmm. And I have done that even this year as a superintendent. And when I first offered it, don't you know, they're probably like, superintendent's going to come model in my room. I'm like, yeah, I would love to do that. It's one of my favorite things to do. And our principals have gone in those rooms, and it's so powerful, but it's doing whatever it takes. If it is sitting down and planning a lesson, if it's helping them work on what should the next goals be, this is where they are the goals too high? Like, do I need to raise them? Are they too low? Like all those discussions, but it's empowering not only the students, but it's empowering our teachers. And I say to our leaders here that if we aren't doing that, and I believe this so strongly, if we are not empowering our teachers to be the change agents in that classroom, then we're failing them. And I know that sounds bold, and I don't mean it to sound harsh. I really don't. But I believe it's what we have to pick up as a building leader, and we have to own that. That's our responsibility, and I feel that we should be held accountable for that, because this happens on our watch or it doesn't happen on our watch. And it's intentional either way. It's purposeful and it's intentional. It happens because it was on purpose and intentional by our actions, or it doesn't happen because we failed to do something. We failed to empower a teacher in the way that they needed to be empowered.
Yeah, so much. I want like a part 2. So much goes into that empowerment,
Mm-hmm.
So
and it's so necessary.
It is so necessary. And one of the other things too is just empowering the teachers to do something with 100% fidelity, because sometimes it gets hard, and sometimes it's like, well, in my core program, and maybe we do need a core program. Yeah, I get that, but we've still got to do this with 100% fidelity. Like when we added Hegarty, we added foundations first at my school, Missouri, and we had Hegarty there, we have Hegarty here. Doing it with 100% fidelity, not like, I'm going to do it 3 times a week, but no, empowering them to do and know that, and holding everyone accountable. Like, no, we've got to do this with 100% fidelity. Mm-hmm. That's
and I think understanding why that's so important, and the impact it has if we don't do it with fidelity, and the impact that it has if we do it with fidelity, and what that looks like for students. And I think taking the blame off of teachers, like you said, like empowering them with the why. And here's the case for students if we do it this way, and here's the case for students if we don't do it this way. Yeah. And, we're all working toward this goal. So we want to do it in the way that's going to help students reach this goal. And it's, instead of a blame mindset, it's an empowerment mindset.
And I think too, with doing it with 100% fidelity, that's where the number of repetitions comes up too. Because, if you're doing it with 100% fidelity, then you can guarantee, okay, so this is the amount of repetitions I'm going to have in whole group, small group, etc. So that's another reason. And it's always explaining your why, and always explaining your purpose. So what's the purpose? Like of this meeting, what's the purpose of this data team meeting? And we aren't going to leave here if we don't have a plan. So it's what's the purpose of this lesson? That's why that lesson objective is so important. And a lot of people ask me, teachers say, like, where do I start? Where do you start with a really good, well-written, clear learner objective based upon a state standard? and then state it at the beginning of the lesson. This goes back to, so this is kind of going to bring it all full circle. Okay, so it's based upon the standard, and then I shared that at the beginning of the lesson. I teach a little, I stop, I go back. It's referring back to that objective. Where are you now? Check for comprehension. Do you know more than you knew 6 minutes ago? Or we've done 3 more. Are you better now? Then it's talking about the relevance of that standard. Why is that important? So often I knew it as a teacher, and I never asked the students why it was important, and I didn't share with them why it was important. Now I know we have to share it with the learner, even the kindergartner and our preschool 4K learners. We have to tell them why it's important. And then that's the relevance of the standard. And then assessing at the end, that's where the learning focus comes at. Did they learn it? Because if they didn't, what am I going to do tomorrow? What am I going to do in response to that data? So I was in a first grade room of one of our teachers here. And so our teachers in Thorpe have gotten so good at asking students, why is this important? Why do we need to know this? Now, this is a first grade classroom, okay? And she had them turn and talk to their partner. So again, I sometimes get a little too dorky and got real involved. So I was leaning in, listening to what they were going to say. And she said, "Oh, I heard such a good one." And so the little boy shares out his class, their standard they were working on. I can understand spoken words, syllables, and sounds. So they were segmenting words and sounds, a lot of their phonemic awareness, phonological awareness. That was the part of the lesson they were on. And she had said the goal and why is this important? Turn and talk to your neighbor. And a little boy had said, because research, first grade, because research shows that little kids that can play with sounds become really good readers when they get bigger.
Goodness.
Oh my God.
So, it's very
and he's
important.
right.
He is right. And I mean, there are teachers that at times didn't know that. I remember not knowing the importance of segmenting phonemes and what that meant. And then once you start hearing those things, then we can't be the person that only has the knowledge, so we've got to share it. And so one of the important things about this work too is using the academic language with everybody and not watering it down, but using, you'll go into our kindergarten rooms okay, so now we'll be working on phonemic awareness. Now we'll be working on phonological awareness. It's actually using that with those students, using accuracy, decoding, fluency. And, our students, you can say, what are the aspects of fluency? Accuracy, rate, expression. And it's actually teaching them. The clearer we are, the more transparent we are, the more we make that purposeful and relevant to the students, then we're going to empower the students as well.
Make it make
Angie,
sense for
I know
them.
we are at time, but
Oh, I'm so sorry.
no, I just wanted to ask you another question, and I didn't want to take too much of your time. But
okay. No, sure. Go ahead.
okay, so I know that the students can use this language. I'm imagining this being a bridge home as well. Mm-hmm. Do you have any stories or anything that really connected the dots between the students feeling this empowerment and knowing their goals and using the academic language that really shows that they understand what they're learning and the goals that they're working toward? And then any kind of stories from home where parents or caregivers may have thought, wow, I understand now what my child is doing at school. Because sometimes as a parent, you're like, what's going on for those 8 hours a day?
Well, first, let me say it's so important to share the work with families and parents and also the community. So I've started here in Thorpe. We have a local newspaper, and we're the Thorpe Cardinals. And so I do a Cardinal Corner, and each week it's just focusing on something that we're doing. I've done one on the science of reading. I've done some on explicit instruction, because we really want to share that. We also, in our conferences, we share those things with students or with our parents and families. And when I was a principal, I have a really cute story though, but when I was a principal, we would do our family literacy nights, and so it was because you want to bring the parents along on the journey. I also want to throw out, you also want to bring your school board along on the journey, because they have to be as knowledgeable about this as everyone else. It helps them really understand the work we're doing. But a parent called me one day when I was principal at Matthews Elementary, and she said, "What is this deal with doing stuff with 100% accuracy?" And she called with another question. She's like, "Hey, Miss Hanlin, before I let you off phone," so I said, "Well, we really want everyone to do everything with 100% accuracy because that means you've got it mastered." And she said that her son was setting the table. And she said, and he's saying, because we would say students will be able to, or I can. And so she said he had a 7. He said, I can set the table with 100% accuracy. And so, he is going around and setting the table. And so she said, like, he will say, "I can brush my teeth with 100% accuracy." And, but when you get that language in their minds, and in their little mindsets, then they start looking at, am I doing this? Am I proficient at this? Have I mastered it? And, we teach kids that you've mastered it when you can teach it to someone else, when you know it so well to teach it. And so then I've had parents call in the beginning of our work at Matthews. They would say, "What's this fauna, stuff?" And I'm like, phonological awareness. And so on one of our parent nights, we would actually do some of this with them. And even at a PTO meeting, we would model, I would do it, a teacher would play the student. Say pan, say it again, but don't say p, and, say mailbox. And, I've done that with parents before, mailbox, say it again, but don't say box, mail. We've even done that in teacher trainings and, things like that. But, those are just a couple of stories. So
it's amazing. Yeah. If you could leave our audience with one piece of advice, our listeners, what would it be? What would you want to leave everyone with? I mean, I feel
Besides
like there's a million things you could say.
I've just recently been reminded of this because, as educators, I mentioned earlier, we've had very challenging few years. We've had something, we've learned a lot that we didn't know that we could learn. Virtual instruction. I mean, how to engage remote learners. We've learned a lot, and we've had to go through a lot. I think one of the important things is remember your why. Why did you start doing this? Yeah. I just attended a state conference for superintendents, and we had a guest speaker there, and she's a current superintendent in Wisconsin. And she said, lean over and tell the person sitting by you why you entered education in the first place. And if you're having a low moment or a low moment, reminding yourself at all times, why are we here? Why are we doing this? Because I feel like every day, there are significant challenges in the role as a building leader. There are also significant challenges as a superintendent. But at the end of the day, as educators, if we can say, you know what, I did what was best for students, and I spent my day doing what was best for students, and, that's why we come to work each day. That's why we're here. If we can just keep students as our focus and as our center. And there will be discouraging things, that happen throughout a school district, or trying times, or implementing new curriculum. I know there's a lot to get our minds off of that. But if we can just stay focused on our why, it really is all about the students, empowering them, and are they learning to read? Because if we teach a child to read, we literally change that child's life forever. We put them on a different pathway. I feel we take them off a pathway of poverty, and we put them on a different pathway. So I think one thing is remember your why, remember your purpose, remember why it is that we do this work. We literally do what I think is the most important work that can be done, and that's educating our future. The other thing is just start the work. I've had so many teachers say, I want to do this, but I don't have a good, strong program. I feel like I need a better program. Just start the work. Mm-hmm. Whatever you learn, whatever you've read about, or whatever if you learn about, phonemic awareness, implement it. If you learn it, just go implement it. And then after you do that, you'll learn more and then implement that. And just every little bit. Because I've left professional development sessions and thought, oh, that was great, with no expectation of implementing it. And then over time, it's like, yeah, that was a really great presentation. I enjoyed it. That was a good hour and a half. That was a good day. But whatever you learn, the next piece, whether you hear it from a coworker, a blog, an article, this podcast from you guys and the great work that you do. I mean, wherever it is, just when you hear something, do it. Try it. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just go in there and try it.
Yeah.
That Melissa and I have that as our podcast philosophy because that's how we started podcasting. That's how, I mean, every single thing that we've done to build a little community, that's how we've done it is, I mean, even as recently as like, hey, let's do Facebook Lives on Fridays. We were like, okay. And then we realized, oh, okay, it's kind of just a recap of each episode. We don't want to do that, but we started the thing. So now how can we, like 2 weeks in, we did it twice. How can we make it so that it is what we think we need? And let's try this. And we're going to keep doing this thing, but let's try and tweak until it really does fit what we think is best for this situation. And it's true. Sometimes it holds you up just thinking about the thing. But if you just try it, once you have enough knowledge, go for it.
I remember differentiated instruction was very overwhelming when you hear that, and so I did it incorrectly in the beginning. And that's okay because I focused on the different part. And so at each small group station, each group had something different. And then I learned it's not differentiated assignments. It's differentiated instruction. The instruction's different. But I at least had started it. I was doing it like small groups. I could have waited till it had been a district-wide or building-wide implementation. It wasn't. I had heard Vicki Gibson talk about it. I'm like, I'm going back to my room and I'm doing this right now. And just taking those few little nuggets and then holding on to those when that's success. And then the next piece you learn, just going right back in and doing it. And the thing that we'll learn is we won't do it correctly the first time. But we can't be too hard on ourselves. That's okay. Again, it's the yet. We don't have it mastered yet, but we're doing it. We're trying it. And our students will benefit by us taking those risks and by doing that. Just jumping in and doing it.
Yeah. And being those good models for fearlessness.
Yes, exactly. And, and if you do learn something and tweak something, I've said that as a principal. I've said that this year's superintendent, let me correct what I said. Like, now we're going to change that. We can do that better. I mean, and just be very honest and upfront and, hey, this isn't perfect, but this is where we're going to start. We'll get better. We'll grow as a team. And I think too, it's constantly having that growth mindset. This doesn't have to be perfect. This is where I am right now. I haven't completely arrived yet, but I will get there. And it's believing in yourself that I will get there. And I think too, finding your community, because I don't want people to hear like, well, maybe if their building principal isn't a strong instructional leader, maybe they haven't heard that, then find a coworker who's like-minded, or find a different teacher, even if they're in a different district, or find someone, like online, or find one of these groups, a Facebook group or something, because
we need a social media. Maybe we need like a reading science app where everybody can be like, find your reading science match.
Yeah. Yeah. Swipe right.
Like
swipe
Tinder
left. Yeah. That's a match.
Reading science.
Yeah. But, find your people and then find something to encourage you. But always just at the end of the day, think, what was it? Just find that moment. What was it that I did today for my students? Because I know there's a moment every day.
For sure.
Of teachers. Yeah.
Angie, thank you so much for sharing your incredible story with us and all of your wisdom. We really, really, really appreciate it.
You're welcome. I'm very humbled that you've asked. I'm always like, I'm always like, do I even, is there even anything interesting to say? Because I just always feel like I'm talking about, the work. But thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the work that you're doing. You're reaching so many and encouraging so many. So thank you for this opportunity today.
Yeah. And we'll have to keep learning more about where you are, the stats at the end of the year, that data. So keep us posted.
Yeah, we are, on our journey, and I can't wait to see where we end up. So it's exciting.
Well, thank you for all that you're doing. Those students are so lucky.
Well, you're welcome. We have a great team here, great teachers doing great work every single day. So we're very blessed. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for listening, literacy lovers. We release a new podcast episode every Friday and share more resources in a newsletter on Tuesday. Sign up for our newsletter at literacypodcast.com. Each week, you'll receive important information, resources, and connected content.
We're excited to create a space for community discussion about our podcast. We want to connect with our listeners and support you in answering your questions. But we also realize there are a lot of other educators out there who have great advice and experience too. Let's keep learning together in our Melissa and Lori Love Literacy podcast Facebook group, and be sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter.
If the content in this episode helped you, share with a fellow educator and teacher friend. Our literacy lover community welcomes educators at every stage of their learning journey. We're so glad you're here to learn with us.